energy access, we want to talk about progress in the digitalization and in new energy vectors as well. We have a packed agenda of activities for this sixth Energy Week. And we hope that as of this Energy Week, we are able to nurture the progress of Latin America and the Caribbean in their energy sectors. We know that 2020 was a year where we were struck by a pandemic, and of course the energy sector suffered because of this. We suffered a significant impact because of a pandemic, but in 2021, although the pandemic conditioned the progress of our region in multiple areas, I do want to highlight some aspects that arose in the energy landscape of Latin America and the Caribbean. We have been able to get 61% of the capacity installed for electrical generation to come from renewable sources, even within the context of the pandemic. We managed to get the region to incorporate over 5 gigawatts from solar energy and wind energy in the region. Additionally, in that same year, in 2020, we got over 10 gigawatts of generation coming from liquid fuels and carbon in Latin America and the Caribbean. So this is what contributes to a vital progress of over 2 points of the participation of renewable sources in the installed capacity of electrical generation. And this goes along the lines of the initiative, the RELAC initiative, to get 70% of installed capacity coming from renewable sources in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this, of course, is a challenge for our region, and it shows the need for the energy sector to become a driving force for the development in the future of Latin America and the Caribbean. We should be installing around 230 gigawatts in this period. They should come from renewable sources in order for us to achieve that 70% goal. And in comparison to the current scenarios, we will have to install over 120 additional gigawatts in order to reach the goal. Our region is, of course, following that path, but we do need to focus on strengthening public policies, long-term planning, the modernization of the energy sector. We also need to focus on how we adjust regulations to have an energy sector model that is growing in dynamics and is incorporating new factors to be considered. We need to talk about storage. We need to talk about energy vectors such as hydrogen. As a matter of fact, this year we managed to get about 10 countries, including within their agenda, hydrogen as part of their long-term planning for the energy sector as well. So Latin America and the Caribbean are moving forward. We are progressing within our energy sector. Another thing to highlight is that we have proven as a region that we have resources available, but we are also competitive at the international level, so that the energy sources that are renewable can also become a part of the development of our region and of the improvement of key aspects such as competition and as the pertaining to the carbon print of our economies. The main focus of discussion of this week will be the decarbonization, or the paths to becoming carbon neutral in Latin America and the Caribbean. And for that, I do want to note that many countries in the region have created their own paths for carbon neutrality. And of course, this is part of a political and strategic discussion. We need to put this topic on the table, discuss what the situation is right now in Latin America and the Caribbean towards becoming carbon neutral, and or becoming decarbonized. Another very relevant aspect to consider is the role of energy integration in the future development of Latin America and the Caribbean. We are setting up a multiplicity of platforms in order to move forward in integration, but if we want to have an energy sector that is as developed as possible, we need to foster integration in our agendas. We need to be clear on the fact that new energy systems with a high penetration of renewable energy, with a higher digitalization and with more modernization in multiple aspects, do require for more dynamic regional markets in order to become more and more efficient. So having said that, I want to thank all of our partners in the IDB for joining us in this opportunity. Thank you also to all of the agencies that are always helping us. Thank you to the International Energy Agency. We also have the foundation joining us as well as a knowledge partner within the framework of the work that we're doing. And thank you to all of the UN agencies that are joining us this Energy Week as they always do. We also want to establish a relationship with the academia in our region because they provide knowledge, and we want to provide a space for dialogue, for discussion about the reality and about the future of the energy sector of the LAC region. And of course, we want to have a serious technical discussion about the development model for our region. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to the Executive Secretary of the IOLADE, Alfonso Blanco. And I want to greet all of the attendees joining us today as well. Let us now hear the manager of the Infrastructure and Energy Sector Manager from the IDB, Ariel Shepes. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It is a true pleasure to be joining you from Washington. As Alfonso was saying, this Energy Week is a platform that has been consolidated and has become an essential space for the dialogue on policy and for matters that are fundamental for the LAC region. It is a true pleasure to be here with you, with Alfonso, and with all of our colleagues and organizations that are participating today. This is the sixth year in which we have organized the Energy Week, and this is the second time we have conducted this event virtually. This event has become, of course, the annual conference in the LAC region for the energy sector. And in the IDB, we have 5 priority areas as part of our 2025 vision. We have regional integration, which is a significant topic, of course, for the energy agenda, as Alfonso was mentioning. We have the focus on the support of the SMEs in order to promote the production sector, then the energy sector growth, gender equality, and actions to fight climate change. That is, how can we decarbonize our energy mixes? So the Energy Week is a very singular space in order for us to learn and develop in depth the different aspects of these areas. The participation of energy ministries, representatives from the public and private sectors, and representatives from the IRENA is a clear sign of the high level of the dialogue that we have within the region. In Latin America, close to 60% of the energy generation comes from renewable sources, and we estimate that this figure will continue improving because of the richness in natural resources in the region. However, the riches of the region are not equitably distributed. We have millions of people within the region who do not have access to electricity. As a matter of fact, a survey from the IDB estimates that in order for us to have 70% of renewable sources in the energy mixes by 2030, we need to invest over 30% of what we are currently investing in renewable sources in the region. This is, of course, a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And especially, it is an opportunity within the context of one of the biggest challenges that the world is facing in order to move forward in a decarbonization agenda that might allow us to meet the goals of our agendas. In order to move towards this challenge, the bank continues to finance energy efficiency, energy diversification plans. We are also promoting new energies such as green hydrogen and also the decarbonization of the economy. As a matter of fact, the bank has announced that all of its loans and projects will be fully aligned with the Paris Climate Agreement for 2023. And this measure will help countries in the LAC region fight climate change and at the same time move towards helping the most vulnerable populations moving towards a more sustainable recovery for everyone. The bank is also trying to mobilize private participation in order to have investments in the energy sector because public resources are limited and the complementation of the resources from the private sector are necessary. Public-private associations and direct participation of the private sector in the energy sector is a clear need that we have in order to continue towards diversification and economic recovery. Within that context, I do invite you to foster and nourish discussions in these next few days. We will be talking about electromobility, decarbonization, green hydrogen, among others, in order to move forward in the construction of an inclusive, sustainable, resilient, and innovative energy sector in Latin America and the Caribbean. We need to discuss this. Thank you very much. And once again, welcome to this Energy Week. It is a true pleasure to be working with Olede in this important panel for dialogue. Thank you very much, Ariel Yepes, Manager of the Infrastructure and Energy Sector of the IDB. We have now come to the end of the inaugural session of the 6th Energy Week, and we will now immediately move forward with our first panel called Digitalization and Innovation in the Energy Sector. We now thank the attendees for joining us, and please stay with us to continue with the next panel. This panel is made up of Roundtable 1 on sustainable transport and Roundtable 2, sustainable cities. We want to thank once again the Executive Secretary and the Infrastructure Manager of the IGB for joining us in the inauguration. Let us move forward with the panel. The moderator for this roundtable is Joan Orbea from Pneuma. Please, Joan, turn on your microphone and your camera to get started with the panel. Welcome, everyone.
Muy buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for that introduction. First, I'd like to thank the IDB for inviting us. It's an honor to be with you here today, moderating this very interesting panel on transportation. And my warm regards to Alfonso Blanco and Mr. Ariel Yepes. To start this panel, considering the closing of the event a couple of days ago, I'd like to frame this with all the objectives that Ariel Yepes was mentioning for each of their organizations and with the messages. And I'd just like to discuss First of all, the acknowledgement of the urgency of our climate crisis, which I think is clearly reflected by those goals that Alfonso was mentioning regarding energetic transformation in the region. Also, the commitment to the maximum increase of 1.5 degrees that will allow us to implement a number of projects and strategies, considering projects and strategies that we're considering for the region, and the specific mention that is made towards the final remarks in terms of the energy transition, innovation and technology that are supporting this energy transition, and for them to also support transport decarbonization, trying to transform transport emissions. Well, I think this really frames this first panel that we will have today. So without further ado, I'd like you to meet our speakers in this first session on sustainable transport. We will be talking to Mr. Felipe Ramirez, who is the General Manager of Transmilenio, Mr. Oliverio Bacelli from the University in Italy, also Dr. Guadalupe Gonzalez from the Energy Secretariat in Panama, Máximo Madrigal from the IDB, and Francisco herself from IRENA. So probably you know them, but I'd like to tell you a bit about them so that you know a bit more about this wonderful panel that we'll be sharing this conversation with today. First, Felipe Ramirez, as I was saying, he is the General Manager of Transmillennium. He is a civil and industrial engineer graduated at the Los Andes University with a master's degree. Sorry?
Una maestría, perdón.
He has a master's degree in civil engineering and School of Economics. As a professional, he has more than 10 years of experience in restructuring projects and public policies in terms of urban development and transportation. At Transmillennium, he has worked as a technician in different projects for PPPs and also tenders for a number. Also, the largest electrical resource fleet in Colombia in terms of electric buses. So welcome, Felipe. We also have today with us Oliverio Bacelli. He is an economist in transportation that he has a lot of experience in counseling and teaching, as well as research, and he has more than 15 and researcher, especially transportation and viability studies, working with sea transportation, rail transportation, air transportation, land transportation. He directs he is responsible for the area of the Center of Research in Geography, Resources, Environment, Energy, and Economics teacher at the University of Bocconi. We also have Dr. Guadalupe. She's graduated from the Panama Technological University. He holds a doctorate in electrical engineering at the Texas University in the United States. She's been working as a researcher assistant since 2006 at the Technological University in Panama, and she's the director of the research program SMARTS-E. Since 2009, she is the director of electricity at the National Secretariat of Energy. Also, she integrates a number of scientific associations the energy field, and he has recently been awarded by the IEEE for her work in Panama. So our regards to Dr. Guadalupe. We also have with us Marcelino Madrigal. He is the Chief of Energy at the IDB. He has more than 20 years of experience working in the energy sector, in governmental agencies, academia, and at the IDB. He was commissioned by the Regulating Commission of Energy of Mexico. He's a specialist of energy at the World Bank and the IDB at the moment. And he has worked in more than 15 countries, providing advice to governments and a number of bodies in terms of public policies, planning, regulation, and market design, as well as a number of projects and a wide variety of segments such as transmission, distribution, regional commerce of electricity, smart grids, and renewable energies. He coordinates regulation teams and mobility within the division of infrastructure of the bank. So our regards to Marcelino. Finally, we have with us Francisco Bosel from IRENA. He is a market and renewables at the International Agency for Renewable Energies. As this, he has provided counseling and guidelines on policies for countries in relation to technological innovation, quality control, and standardization for the successful implementation of renewables. And he has worked as a co-author of reports on energy transition. He has more than 15 years of experience as a professional. He has also worked with technical standards to quantify the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in for projects of the mechanism of development, the clean development mechanism. He has also worked as a consultant for projects of renewable energies and energy efficiency at DNVGL. So this was just to give you an overview of the amazing panel that will be joining us today. And I would like to move on to the first question that we have. So you has been working with a number of important projects that have an application. You're working with clean energies in the region and internationally. And I'd like you all to tell us a bit about that work that you've been carrying out related to electrical mobility and what are the results that you have achieved. So perhaps we can start with you, Felipe. Hello. Sorry. Something happened here and I was unable to hear the question. Would you mind repeating it? Yeah, we just wanted you to tell us a bit about the projects for the application of clean technologies that you're working at, that you're working with at Transmillennium, results and outcomes that you've seen over the last couple of years.
Puede ser, Felipe, que no te estábamos oyendo.
I'm sorry, Felipe, we're not hearing you really well. It's you're breaking up now, I think. Can you give it a try now? Okay, go ahead. I don't know what happened. Okay, so I was just telling you that for us it's really important at Transmillennium in Bogota to keep on going down the right path and moving towards decarbonization, trying to work on this problematic. So Bogota, just to give you an overview, is a city that I've always thought to be privileged for quite a long time, in that when we look into the future, we are a city that will be able, for example, to ensure a water supply to our inhabitants, and we are taking every effort so that this actually happens. Because in the mountains of Bogota, we have one of the biggest reservoirs in the world, that is the water from in the city. So we have gravity that is actually bringing us water, but any kind of energy source. As we said at the beginning of this panel, we were talking about 60% of Latin America. Well, in Colombia, 70% of energy is sustainable. This is mainly thanks to these hydroelectrical sources. So I always think what place could be better than these to transform our fleets, and what are the steps that we need to take to have cleaner fleets and everything that this implies. At Transmillennium, we are making a number of we're betting on a number of aspects, but we are really betting on the renovation of our fleet. We have had around 3,500 vehicles in the last couple of years, out of which approximately 1,500 are electric. So we will be getting those between February and March next year. That means that we already have 483 already on the road, and there are getting next year. This is a substantial figure, considering that this is one of the biggest fleets worldwide outside China of electric buses. And this means that we are at the forefront as leaders in this kind of restructuring processes. That is what we need, and this is something that we need in terms of how we fund this kind of energies. Many times we just focus on this, but sadly we can't find sometimes all the institutionality that is required so that our citizens can actually have access to electric fleets. So I believe that we have taken some good steps. There is still a lot to be done, but we have some good proof of how, when you're determined and you make good decisions, you can take good steps. A number of electric buses. This goes together with a number of fundamental processes. For example, operations, frequencies, improving frequencies for buses, bus frequencies for our users, and having better technologies associated to those electric buses in terms of how we can better regulate this and provide our users with a better offer, knowing that buses will be what it means to take these buses to our responding infrastructure. The things that we are learning in Latin America in terms of the infrastructure that is required in cities that are usually big, which mean good strategies depending on the regulations of each city that will allow us to have a good infrastructure at the right time, so that we can have, as we have today in Bogota, 483 electric buses. For the rest of buses to come next year, again, I think it's going to be around February, March, April, we'll have 10 additional electric fleets, which is going to be fundamental for cities, because these places will have solar panels that will allow our buses to recharge, and it will be in a clean and sustainable way. So we have a number of structure when it comes to implementing this kind of project, but we understand at Millennium that the strategy needs to be stations, which helps us to, for example, recycle at these stations. And I believe that this is a comprehensive strategy with
I believe that this is a comprehensive strategy, but of course, there are those who try to focus more on pollution itself, those that focus on the materials, others on climate change. And of course, these are different topics, but once we connect them, we raise more. And of course, I think that that is setting an important trend in Bogota, in all senses of what we want to do and carry out in the city. Thank you, Felipe. It is very interesting to see the vision of Transmilenio. That is an entity that brings people together, moves buses. It's nice to see how you are integrated within an energy mix of Bogota. you can go beyond the energy provision. Now, pertaining to infrastructure and what you were saying about the 10 vehicle deposits that you will have, I would like to ask Mr. Oliviero, because in Europe, you're obviously promoting electrical mobility and the development of a very progressive infrastructure for electrical vehicles. So I would like to know about the results of the NEL assessment about costs in earnings of the electrical transport changes.
So, participant and good afternoon for the Latin American. What's the contrary? Again, buenos días for the Latin American participant and good afternoon for the European participant. And thank you for the invitation. I will briefly try to describe the main results of the Enel Foundation study that we carried out here at Bocconi University with the collaboration of NLX. And the title of the study was Scenarios and Perspective of the Electrification of a Public Road Transport. And we did a benchmark analysis throughout 11 countries around the world, comparing the total cost of ownership, but we added something to the specific methodology for the total cost of revenues of ownership coming from the second life of the batteries and the bus to grid services. This is the main novelties that we introduced from the methodological point of view in this type of studies. The benchmark analysis in Italy, in Spain, in UK, in Brazil, in Chile, in Colombia, Mexico, Peru, United States, and Australia. And we compared different types of power supply alternatives for standard buses for the public transport. But we had also to compare different type of models, organizational models of the public transport in these countries. And we introduce also specific parameters strictly related to the millage, for instance, that is completely different among the countries. Metropolitan area, and therefore we are expecting a sort of a boom in the Italian market for the electric buses, for instance. But I would like to explain better the methodology that we used in this study, because we compared also not only diesel buses, but also compressed natural gases and biomethane buses, and also the hydrogen buses. The interesting difference between our study and other similar studies carried out on the life cycle assessment of the bus fleet is that we introduced the revenues component, especially the second life of the batteries and the bus to grid services, as I was said in the introduction. The bus to grid services is a real novelty for this sector, but for instance, in the United States is starting to become more and more popular, especially for the school buses. And we have to consider that the industrial sector of the bus is completely changing in this year, and especially for specific countries at the European, but also at the Latin American level. This is strictly due to the initiatives that many countries are carried on, but also to market context, because automotive manufacturers are investing a lot in new factories in Europe, but also in America. And therefore, we are expecting that the market will pass from the 80,000 electric buses sold in 2021 to approximately 700,000 in 6 years. Therefore, with a compound average growth rate of approximately 43%. That is something that will completely change the market and reduce the investment cost. That are carried out by the European Commission and by the European Investment Bank, specifically dedicated to the electrification of the fleets, but there is some specificity for the level. You have to buy a certain percentage that will grow in the coming years of zero emission buses and low emission buses. But there are also some specific proposal to introduce novelties in the diesel bus sector, and therefore the cost of this type of buses will increase, and therefore the competitiveness of the investment in the electric buses will increase. And also there will be a specific regulation of the batteries and the market for the second life, because batteries will be reused or introduced in the public transport sectors, for instance, supporting the bus depot. Therefore, the results of the analysis are really interesting for all the countries, but 6 of the 11 countries that we have analyzed have already reached the total cost of ownership parities. Therefore, you do not have to consider this type of revenues in order to reach the break-even. While, for instance, in Italy, in United Kingdom, and the United States, the role of the revenues coming from the second life of the batteries and coming from bus to grid services are really important, because they will create in the coming years. So we have calculated that for Italy, for instance, starting from next year, the electric buses will be competitive compared to this total cost and revenues of ownership, while for the United States, this will be approximately 2026. As I was said, for Latin America, this type of analysis already shown that the parity has already been reached, as the Transmillennium operators already knows very well. Thanks for the opportunity to give this brief presentation.
Thank you very much, Oliviero. Muchas gracias. La verdad, bien interesante.
Thank you so much, Oliviero. That was a very interesting survey. They give us a notion of the importance of policy, of course, but also of how that public policy can turn into additional revenue. So I would like in the second round of questions perhaps to see how you have assessed that in the Latin American countries such as Mexico and Colombia. But now I would like to move forward to PhD Guadalupe. so she can tell us more about the initiatives in terms of leadership in the Energy Secretariat of Panama pertaining to electrical mobility and how the private sector is becoming involved in the development of these electrical mobility programs. And I would like to know if we need more stakeholders to participate and if national policy is enough to massify electrical mobility or if we need to have more adjustments in the regulations of the country. Welcome, Doctor. Thank you. First I want to apologize because my voice is breaking up. Because definitely at the level of the Energy Secretariat, we are prioritizing the electrical mobility. As since 2019, we have been working towards an energy transition agenda that holistically deals with the multiple components of the sector that are making it possible for our energy sector to with actions against climate change. As a matter of fact, even if Panama is a carbon negative country, we want to remain within those parameters. And one of the sectors that generates the most pollutants and greenhouse effect emissions is the energy sector in Panama. And out of that, the component that creates the most emissions is the transport sector. Together with this, Panama is highly reliable. And if we look at our energy mix, approximately 74% of all imports come from fuel derivatives used in the transport sector, which together with the other factors that I mentioned leads us to the need for developing and implementing policies to transform our transport sector into a more sustainable sector, which is why we have conducted multiple actions. First of all, we have massified transportation using metro lines. I think that is one of the actions that we have been implementing in stages. We're trying to have 9 more metro lines in Panama. We have 2 active lines as of now, and we are designing the subsequent lines to then move forward with their construction. And apart from that, we have a national electrical mobility strategy that tries to replace private and bus transportation to move towards electrical mobility in Panama. And we want to transition into electrical mobility because we have a high potential of renewable energy in the country. We have our eyes set on solar energy in particular, and we're trying to create a distributed generation strategy in the country because we see a correlation between electrical energy generation and the use of solar panels in homes to create a good balance. So these are all strategies that we're using within the framework and the context of our energy transition agenda. And of course, electrical mobility is a pioneer for that. We are working together with a private company. We created an institutional electrical mobility committee so that we can start creating action plans from results. One of the important aspects of this strategy is that we have new fleets.
A number of studies for MIBUS bus fleets, which is the bus system that we have in the city of Panama. And at the moment, we are doing some financial economic analyses to decide on the implementation of this fleet change. It has taken us longer than we had foreseen because, as my colleagues have previously said, there is a number of factors that need to be taken into consideration. Of course, funds are an issue that is yet to be approached because that initial capital that is required, well, it's not that easy to overlook that when you still have petrol running buses that have a much lower cost. in terms of initial infrastructure. That, of course, affects not only the fleet, but also when you talk to the common citizen that is interested in changing to an electric vehicle, when they see that initial cost, is when the work that is being conducted with the banking system becomes so relevant. And that is a key to us as well, because it can help us to achieve some funding mechanisms with the banking system, so that it will be easily acquired by the people, and through that, little by little, we will begin to introduce a greater number of electric vehicles, so that we can have those better rates. And that is why the banking system also needs to have a number of previous steps, such as, for example, regulations. They need to get good clearance. We need to have a clear scheme of how to raise awareness amongst the community. We need to have clear educational systems, so that we can work in terms of mechanics and electromechanics, and workshops that will be needed throughout the country, so that we can introduce this new technology. That's straightforward. Stakeholders to become involved. And of course, the energy policy that we have in our country is that very first step in this process. As the governing agency of energy policies in the country, we are the ones that are pushing this topic forward, but we also need everyone's support. Panama is a small country. We need at the moment a greater introduction of electric vehicles. We need to have different brands. We need to have a better offer, so that we also have a variety, and people in Panama can actually choose. And in spite of all the steps that we have taken so far, we have passed, after a third stage debate, an act that promotes electric mobility in Panama, that approaches a number of topics related to this. And the only thing that is missing is the president's signature for this to be absolutely enforced at a national scale. We have been developing as well a number of instruments, so that the public sector can actually have access to electric mobility. We have conducted seminars, training courses. We have been talking, we've been having conversations, for example, with the taxi fleets that we know are being greatly impacted by the rise in the cost of fuels over the last couple of weeks. So we've done a lot of work, which is really necessary, so that all the stakeholders become involved, and we can keep on moving forward in terms of electrical mobility development in Panama. Together with the electrical mobility agency, we've been working so that we can provide a solution to people in Panama, so that they can have access to electrical mobility in the short term. Thank you, Dr. Guadalupe. I believe that the Panama case is very interesting, and how all the contributions from either sectors is so well integrated. It's very valuable. If all of this is taken into consideration in legislation, I believe that, well, it poses a great example of how you can do things. And we can see that this is something that it's having a huge impact. Even though we don't have as many vehicles as we would like to have, as many electric vehicles that we would like to have, I think that, Panama, considering its size, is doing really well, and it's had a great impact. So thank you so much, Dr. Guadalupe. I'd like to move on now to Mr. Marcelino Madrigal from the IDB, so that he can tell us a bit about their experience in this sense. What Guadalupe was telling us about in terms of funding, how to overcome that initial cost, and maybe to hear about their perspective, how you can get the public system involved in developing electric energy programs, and what are the IDB policies to promote this into electrical mobility in Latin America. Thank you, Joan, for I'd like to thank everyone, and say hi to all my fellow speakers in this panel. I'll tell you a bit about what we're doing at the IDB in terms of funding, but the stage at which we are in terms of electrical mobility still requires great support from the public sector. What the public sector needs to do to enable electrical mobility is of utmost importance. If we hadn't structured plans and policies for fleet transitions from the great operators of these countries, or maybe didn't have the enabling framework for the charging infrastructure that is required, we wouldn't be having this 2,400 electric buses that we have in the region. So the role of the public sector is fundamental for this electrical mobility transition to provide the framework that will enable this new technology. Considering that we are at an OLADE, I believe that it's important to try to take a look at what renewables looked like 10 years ago. In terms of electrical mobility, we are where we needed a lot of support from the public sector. First of all, from energy policies. We need to understand that this is a tool that will allow us to improve energy efficiency, and an electric vehicle is 80% efficient, and that is, by contrast, a fuel run vehicle is only 20% effective. That decreases gas emissions, it decreases noise pollution. So we need to acknowledge the value of these technologies and to set clear goals whenever possible, especially in public transportation. We believe that it's very cost effective. So it's key to act from policies at the highest sectors when business models in Mexico and other cities. These are business models that basically enable long-term funding so that new stakeholders can become part of this electrical mobility business in transport, which is very similar to what we did in the energy, find these PPAs and public tenders to get funding to new technologies. The transportation sector is a bit more complex because of the institutional scenario of how transportation is regulated, how income is generated to pay for services. So the regulatory models for the transportation sector play a key role, and that is something that only the public sector can do. At the ITB, we have provided support to a number of countries in terms of developing their strategies and providing support also to research on how to develop business models. And this is also related to the enabling framework to develop charging infrastructure, which is something that a number of countries in the region that have made some progress in this have to define the should be regulated and what are the conditions and the terms under the charging infrastructure ecosystem, not work usually within the charging stations, but also for individual mobility, where you will have, for example, charging stations both at home or at the workplace, as well as in the main motorways and freeways of our countries. There's also an interesting study that we did at the bank that kind of collects the main actions taken in this sense, and I'll share this with you. So the public sector is fundamental. I believe that we need to work especially with institutional fleets, which is something that has been done in a number of countries. We have provided our support to countries like Barbados and Costa Rica, which have great fleets of institutional electric vehicles and charging infrastructure that has been deployed thanks to the support at the IDB. At the IDB, we acknowledge the value of public transportation and the electrical mobility solutions to reduce emissions up.
We have over 50 activities in multiple countries conducting technical advice. We are working with bus models. We are working with regulations for buses. We are working with fiscal incentives that countries are working on towards bus parity. within restrictive taxing environments. There are many countries that ask whether it's appropriate to focus on taxation and fiscal incentives given the context, but we know that this is something significant. We simply need to focus on the transition to new fiscalization. This is a win-win situation, especially for countries that are importing petrol. We continue funding electrical mobility. We started pioneering programs many years ago, such as the Costa program that has already been mentioned. We have established credit lines with bank windows in the bank. We have provided for Ecuador, for Peru. And because within electrical mobility, the policy framework is significant, we also provide loans based on policies. And these particular loans have allowed us to provide support to countries in their decarbonization strategies that have a strong component of electrical mobility. So this funding based on in Costa Rica and in Chile. So apart from the funding that we provide, we are moving forward in areas change of business models for buses. We have a regulation framework in order to incentivize the collaboration of private and public sectors. We are focusing on fiscal towards new frontiers. Recently, we carried out an announcement about ferries in Latin America, and we realized that over 15 ferry routes could be electrified. This was an amazing assessment that we carried out in this load or public transportation system ferries, and we are now assessing the possibility of implementing this first in Brazil. So there are frontiers ahead that we need to move towards. We need to explore them, and we tackle from multiple perspectives. We need to focus local level, at the transport sector level, and we need to, of course, provide support for countries in all of these areas that I was mentioning. I think I can wrap up my first comment right now, but I will be sharing with you through the chat some of the assessments that might be interesting for you as attendees rather than go into detail about them. But I am here for you if you have any questions for me. Questions about our technical assistance as well as our financial supports. Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Marcelino. The funding associated to policies is vital because at the end of the day, you are trying to implement this projection that we have and these great ideas that we have. And the subject of the ferries is really because this is something that was not present in the policies, but at the same time, we know that this kind of transportation is very important for the region, and perhaps within the strategies and the policies, we have not heard that much about it, even if this kind of transportation has an impact in maritime life conservation and in the protection of biodiversity. So it would be interesting to go into depth about this. So thank you, Marcelino. Now I would like to yield the floor to Francisco from IRENA, so he can tell us more about the IRENA projects, about how you are working are looking at regional initiatives that are supporting policies infrastructure focused on electrical mobility, especially in urban at the IRENA level. Thank you, Joan, and thank you to the organizers for inviting IRENA to participate in this event. At IRENA, we for a couple of years now, because we understand that this is a virtuous circle where renewable electricity decarbonizes the transport sector, but at the same time, the transport sector becomes a new opportunity for the flexibility of the electrical system and allows for the integration of more renewables in the electrical grids. But of course, for this to happen, we need an intelligence load approach. At IRENA, we are focusing on these aspects, and I would like to get started by providing you with a global perspective on electromobility. Across the world, we currently have about 11 million electrical vehicles. Looking towards the decarbonization, now that we have COP26 aligned with the increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius in temperature, about 380 million electrical vehicles by 2030 to fight climate change, and over 1 billion electrical vehicles by 2050. So the expansion of this market will be enormous. We are making progress, of course, but the road ahead will be laborious for sure. And if we look at this, considering the infrastructure of an electrical load, we have about 1.8 million public loading stations. Basically, most of them are in China. China has about 800,000 public loading stations. But by mid-century, we need to install about 30 loading out of them. 10 of them should be public, either slow, mid, or fast charge. We accumulated about 1 million in 1 year, but we need to increase that by 10 million a year. So the development that we need is quite big. But of course, this is an interesting opportunity for investment because this means that we will be requiring investment about $200 billion a year for loading stations each year. But of course, the impact of electrical vehicles in the electrical grid, of course, has multiple faces. One is the energy demand. The increase in the energy demand because of the existence of electrical vehicles is not as significant as we thought it might be. But of course, another important thing is what time the loading is. Vehicles are loaded simultaneously, and for that, of course, electrical vehicles will have a significant impact on the energy demand. Also, looking towards the future, we renewable in order to move towards the decarbonization, even if we are doing nothing at the level of fossil fuels. So if an electricity is coming from a hydraulic mix, it will be different from a wind mix or from a solar mix because of variability. And as a matter of fact, the loading of smart vehicles has a more significant impact when the electrical systems are more photovoltaic, because we know that the profile of photovoltaic energy is more clear during the day, has a peak in the day, rather than and that's as opposed as to what happens with mixes that are wind mixes, and that's another aspect that we need to bear in mind. So, what is the electric
the smart charging? There are some basic levels that could be simply through price signals of different dynamic rates. So you could get vehicle users to charge or decharge at certain times of the day automatic remote control by the system, by the electric system operator. So through an agreement with the user, they could provide some compensation that changes their charging profile. And of course, each of these aspects is more complex and more sophisticated. But the more sophisticated it becomes, then electric charging is also more flexible to make it easier for the electrical system. So at least the first steps need to be regulation is key to this, because for us to be smart in terms of the way that we charge our vehicles, we need to have smart tariffs for users to make their their vehicles available to be charged depending on the need of the system operator. And of course, this requires dynamic tariffs, but it also requires to have business models that have aggregators as an idea, because each of the batteries of these vehicles is small, but if we aggregate them all, we will have enough electric storage capacity to balance the system at the times of the day in which you have the highest peaks, or actually the demand is quite the opposite, it's quite low. Also taxes, any kind of pilot program that has been conducted in Europe, this vehicle to grid technology has shown that there are some tax issues where there is, for example, a tax with which you will charge your vehicle, and then also when you're decharging or you're injecting back the electricity into the grid, there is yet another tax, which makes this whole business model much less appealing if you want to work with a connected grid system. This is key to decarbonization. Of course, at IRENA, we are in Germany. We're in the city of Bonn, close to, and in the city of Hamburg, you have work, and they have conducted a study. Apparently, a 10% of electric vehicles would have to change. Well, they would have to change about 10,000 kilometers of electric cables and transformers to increase the capacity and be able to meet the new demand peaks for the new charging levels. Digital system that is remotely controlled, where you can also connect this to a tax system that will compensate users. Then these investments could be deferred, and you're talking about a model that would require about 20 million euros for the new systems and cables, but this digital system would only imply 10% of that investment, 2 million euros, and you wouldn't have to change all the cables and wires and connections, because let's imagine a city like Bogota or like Quito or like Buenos Aires, having to change 10,000 kilometers of cables and shutting down roads for 6-8 months, changing transformers, energy cuts, and all the inconveniences that this would cause. To our citizens. So what clearly becomes so really important is planning between the energy agencies and policymakers. And well, buses are a different thing, because they're not the same as passenger vehicles, because passengers are basically, private vehicles can be charging at home, but buses are being used 90% of the time. So that means that they can't be charged at all times. They need to be charged in a station, and that means that this will be concentrated. These charges will be concentrated in hubs that will have very high demand. So if you have a charging station for an electric vehicle, well, this will give you around 6 and 7 kilowatts of high response. And for buses, you're talking about between 150 and 180 kilowatts. So it is much bigger in terms of the impact on the grid when you have a number of buses that is being charged at the same time. So you need to analyze other options. For instance, that is generated on the site where buses are being charged. So through renewables, for example, having solar panels, PV to provide energy to these facilities to handle these demand peaks of bus charging. And third, again, the planning aspect. You know that by having such a big increase for a fleet of about 200 or 300 buses that are parked in a charging facility requires from us between 2 and 3 years of planning with the distribution entity to be able to successfully implement a solution. So as I said, we need to really think forward and plan 2 or 3 years ahead in terms of what will be the requirements. We need very clear roadmaps in terms of the goals to increase the electric fleet of buses in the public system in our cities. And well, so maybe, but feel free to ask any questions or I'm at your service. Thank you, Francisco. Truth be told, you've got me thinking in terms of everything that you said at the beginning in terms of these hubs and how we need to take advantage of this technology. It's very clear the difference between using 20 million euros for a city. If we can reduce that to 10% to 2 million, if that allows you to adopt and implement a technology that will be successful as well, that's great. And personally, I have maybe we won't be able to try things out and then we can just come and implement it. We have to work together to everything at the same time because we're running out of time. We don't have enough time just to tag along, you know. So thank you, Francisco, for your time. Before we close this panel, I'd like to hand over the microphone to our panelists, to our speakers, maybe if they have any comments of what their colleagues said, if there is anything else that they would like to add, or otherwise I can just give a final closing to this session so that we can move on to the second one. Yeah, Guadalupe. I would just like to wrap up by saying that this is exactly like what you said. It's key for us to tackle this, all of us together. We can't just wait, as you said, just to test and try, and then we just join the party. You know, I believe that each and every one of our countries can, from their own position and perspective, contribute in some way to decarbonizing our planet. Our perspective here in Panama, based on the experience of the last couple of years, hard work, and this is something that always happens whenever you have some new kind of technology. So this is important to be talked about since Panama. Since 2010, Panama has provided tax incentives for this. We're in 2021, and what has happened in these in these 11 years? Well, technologies have become better, and we have a wider variety of vehicles, batteries that have better performance, that are able to meet the needs of our users, of our end users, so that they can satisfied with the equipment that they're buying, that they are using on a daily basis. So, you know, at the end of the day, I think it's also about a balance of how technology progresses and how you develop policies. And this is also something that the end user, that our citizens will perceive. So for those of us that innovate in terms of technology, we need to have that open communication channel with the end user, because they are the ones that will acquire this technology, and they are the ones, I want to stress this again, that need to understand what happens, for example, when it's raining if you're working with an electric vehicle and you just tell them, well, nothing's going to happen. What happens when this or this or that? So, you know, the technical details, this is something that they need to know about. So each and every one of the actions that we are taking is moving us towards this awareness raising in the most pragmatic way for an end user. And the relevance of policies and actions that are being taken. Just to give an example, in terms of infrastructure, last year in Panama, we only had 3 chargers. And in a matter of 1 year, we have 60 chargers, 60 public chargers of private companies. So for us in the develop this from the private sector as well, because we believe this is an opportunity to also create new jobs. We need to have all these actions really well outlined to give a sense of security to private investors that are interested in investing in more charges, so that we can also transmit that sense of security to our end users ultimately. And I believe that these are the correct steps that need to be taken. This is definitely requires us all to become involved. And I believe that events like this event is a great chance to exchange experiences and opinions. I would like to talk to Felipe, for instance, in terms of how they have overcome the funding challenge in Colombia. This is a great way, to from IDB, with whom I speak on a daily basis, because we know that there are a number of countries that need to implement the same kind of things, so that not everything, boils down to regulations, which of course it's important to modify the regulatory system and modify it in an open-minded way. But at the end of the day, we need to understand that every action that is requires us to leave our comfort zones, to bring in mentioned in all of the interventions. First and foremost, there's reality that arises, this overlap between the energy sector and the transport sector. They work together, they should be working together, be aware of the beneficial impact that this could have when it comes to reducing emissions, as well as the significant impact that it could have on the grid, as Francisco was telling us, what this could mean in terms of energy demands. Picking on what Guadalupe was saying, the importance of the public sector, but always considering the private sector as well, so that we can profit from the benefits that the private sector has. A great example that Dr. Guadalupe mentioned was charging infrastructure. We wanted planned and present geographically throughout the different places where you will be working with. And the public sector is the one that is, planning this, but it doesn't mean that the investment necessarily needs to come from in a good way things with the private sector, so that we can get charging infrastructure in the right places, incorporating the knowledge that we wanted to be incorporated and to be developed accordingly. Also, the relevance of private companies in terms of technology integration, not only in terms of the vehicles, but also charging infrastructure, smart charging, as Francisco was saying. And just I'd like to talk again to Mr. Oliviero about that study that he was mentioning. I got hung up with these ideas of how to get additional income, for instance, from these vehicles, how to be part of the public transportation system, such as the case of taxis, but that those extra incomes that we could have, considering, for example, the cases of Chile, Colombia, and Mexico, how these things could be structured, and what are the barriers that we need to overcome, and that maybe.
Thanks for the opportunity to give some details respect to these specific aspects, because for instance, the analysis that we carried out in 11 countries has underlined the importance of exchanging experiences among the countries. Because, for instance, the United States have some peculiarities regarding the bus to grid services to be able to increase the revenues for the public transport operators, or to reduce the cost for the utilities, bus to grid services schemes. For instance, for school buses. School buses in the United States have already underline the importance of this type of revenues because they have a very long period in the depot, especially during the summer period, where there is the peak of request of this type of services for the grid. Therefore, the American experience that has been carried out with several types of contracts can be an example for while, for instance, the European experience for the second life of the batteries can be very interesting, because in Europe we have several operators, several manufacturers that are carrying out experiments in recycling batteries. For instance, one of these manufacturers, and this can be an example that can be used and in other countries. But what I would like to underline after having carried out this type of benchmark analysis among different type of motorization in different countries, that transformation is where you have to consider it in a systematic way environmental policies, industrial policies, and circular policies. As I was saying, the bus to grid services and the second life of the batteries are a sort of a circularity, but also market aspect, because you need economies of scale, for instance, in among the operators, and for the construction of the efficient depots, but also bus manufacturer and battery factories, because, for instance, in recycling batteries, it's very important the transport cost or the experience in a system. Therefore, having the experience of battery factories close to the bus operator is also important. Then you need the support of the government or the utilities in order to reduce the cost of electricity. For instance, avoiding a specific type of taxes that are a German example, for instance. And then you need also new investors. That is the last element for the ecosystems. Therefore, we have a sort of index of policy. And to get to speed up the goals for everyone in the public transport sector.
Thank you so much, Guillermo. Muchas gracias por la respuesta.
Thank you so much. Oliviera, for your answer. So before we close, very briefly, we have a question about the about combustion buses and the last thing that was said about that. So maybe Felipe, you could answer that question. Felipe from Transmillennium, how they worked with these new vehicles and what you have done with those vehicles that were no longer in the system. Thank you. Yeah, I was reading that question. I thought that it was a very interesting one. In the case of Colombia, it's well, in Bogota, it's been very positive because all of these old vehicles were sent to the scrapyard. They have, you know, they are over their use life, and we have two kinds of vehicles. One that were the newest vehicles of the kind, and then the oldest one that were very polluting, that are also coming out. And by the 31st of December of this year, we have some great news, which is that old system of buses will have been completely dismantled, and that material is used later by, for example, the metal industry to create new materials for constructions. For instance, the tires of buses are used to create a granular material that is used for pavement design. So we're really reusing the materials from these buses. And I believe that that's a great question, because we can't really be talking about decarbonization and reducing pollution if we don't address the importance of considering the whole chain that this implies, and how important it is for us to have this final link, such as, for example, what happens when you send a bus to the scrapyard. But that's what we have done in Bogota. We've sent them to the scrapyard. They have moved on, and then we try to recycle as much as we can. Thank you, Felipe, for that insight on circular economy, so that nothing is left outside the reusing and recycling system. Having said this, we are going to close this first session. Thank you so much. Thanks to you, Felipe, Guadalupe, Marcelino, Oliviero, everyone for your contributions, for joining us here today. And now we will move on to our second topic of this first session on transportation. We're going to be talking about biofuels. So I'd like to introduce you to the three experts that will be with us here today to talk a bit about biofuels. First of all, we have Carlos Suarez. Carlos, welcome. He comes from the US Green function. He works as a regional consultant of ethanol for Latin America, and it's a non-profit organization that promotes the use of barley, wheat, sorghum, and other related products in the States. He works with key stakeholders both in the private and public sector in Latin America to help them to achieve goals together with the energy transition that is happening worldwide. Before working at the council, Mr. Suarez worked for Nature and Conservancy as an associate director for business development in Latin America, and in this position, he worked in fundraising with the business sector, working as a consultant for projects on safe water supplies and sustainable infrastructure. So welcome, Carlos, to this panel. Also with us today, we have Luis Porta. Luis Porta, he is a mechanical engineer from Brazil. He's a doctor of mechanical engineer. He works in thermodynamics at UNIFED, and he's a scientist of the FAO. He was between 87 and 88. He is the director of the Brazilian Company of Natural Gas and Biofuels. He is a consultant for energy resources for a number of UN agencies, for the FAO, for ECLAC, for the PNUD, and for the PNUMA, as well as for the IDB and IRENA. He's an associated researcher of an interdisciplinary energy planning team, and he also works at the CBC Center. So Luis, welcome today. And we also have with us in this panel Mr. Agustín Torroba. Agustín comes from the ICA. He has a degree in economics. He has a master's degree in energy of the University of Buenos Aires. He used to be a consultant in energy issues, providing counseling and advice to a number of research teams. He was a counselor of the former Ministry of Energy and Mining of Argentina and National Director of Biofuels. And at the moment, he works as a specialist of fuels at the Institute for the American Cooperation in Agriculture, and also at the American States Organization. So welcome, the three of you, to this panel on biofuels. And to kick off, I'd like to ask you all an open question, considering that each of you has a number of projects that are going on in terms of the using how to use ethanol in our countries, in the States, in Argentina, among others. So I'd like you to tell us briefly about that work that you're conducting in terms of the transportation units. How can you avoid conflict with food production and biofuels, and what are the results that you have achieved in the countries where you have worked? So maybe we can start with Carlos. Welcome. Hello, Oni. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to all the attendees and my colleagues and friends, Agustin and Luis. I feel that it's a very good thing that we have this biofuels panel after this electrification panel that we've just heard, because it showcases that our North Star is electrification, which doesn't mean that we don't have some room for other kinds of activities, and that this may not be entirely necessary. This is where I think that maybe Agustin and Luis and hopefully myself will shed some light on the relevance of biofuels for the next couple of decades. So trying to directly address your question, as an organization, we are really focused on trying to help policymakers from the public sector and the private sector, trying to understand the role of biofuels, specifically ethanol, in the present transition, the present energy transition, as a complement to the efforts that are being conducted to try to electrify the transportation system, and more specifically in terms of light vehicles. So the scope of our works comprises trying to enable technical resources whenever available, because we have a wide number of resources that are yet unknown, or to help them be developed when required, depending on the needs of each country. In that sense, what we try to do is we try to support the efforts of both private and public stakeholders that want to implement mixes of ethanol and fuel to get better sustainable goals for the transport sector. First of all, in terms of the decarbonization of fuels, that is something that will happen over the next couple of decades. Secondly, to try to understand the potential to reduce toxic emissions that are related to current fuels in use. And third, to talk about the opportunities to improve the quality of fuel, which is a goal that the whole region is facing at the moment. In this sense, we're working on this because our partners produce ethanol, but we are strongly convinced that ethanol and other fuels need to play a complementary role, particularly in a region like ours, which whenever we talk about electrification, we think about great trends in terms of the adoption of electric vehicles, but it's not the same to talk about the adoption of electrification in a region like Europe or the US or even Asia than talking about electrification in Latin America. It's really important to get this down to earth in terms of the infrastructure challenges that we have in the region and the economic capacity that we have in our countries. All the incentive programs and deployment, infrastructure deployment programs are subjected to the same limitations that we have for other areas of life. And that is something that we need to take into account when we formulate policies in this regard. So A number of expert studies point at Latin America as the region that will take the longest to make this transition to electrification, because we will have a lower rotation of our vehicle fleet. And so we need to understand what is going to happen over the next 30 years with the combustion engines that will keep on being used in the market. We are expecting after 2030 to actually begin to see an acceleration in the adoption of electric vehicles. But according to some last estimates by Standard and Poor's Plus, by 2040, the sale of electric vehicles will have achieved 10%. And this will be something that will happen faster and faster. But if you think about only 10% by 2040, then it means that still 90% of vehicles will still have internal combustion 2 decades from now. And that is why the role of biofuels is so important in terms of facilitating or complementing those efforts towards electrification, because a product such as ethanol will reduce emissions, and not only will it reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also toxic emissions that are harmful to citizens. So we believe that in Latin America, ethanol could generate not only benefits to decarbonize our cities, but also trying to empower agri-industries in our countries. So we are working hand in hand with ministries and secretariats and regulators in the public sector, as well as with producers, associations, and oil manufacturers to try to, in a way, unlock or at least understand the value proposition that could become materialized for each country and for each stakeholder, because we have different interests, and the structures that we have in each of our countries will represent challenges or opportunities in terms of, for example, price, fuel regulations, and some of the specifications. Because this is really important to remove these obstacles. As an industry, we believe that we have helped to we have some regions like Brazil, Ecuador, or Colombia, where the ethanol supply from the United States has helped us to complement this national offer, which makes a product that is more cost effective. And additionally, and this is a new dimension, we need to provide flexibility to local producers, right? And at the beginning, initially, these ethanol mix programs for local consumption, well, they begin to have great opportunities at an international level, in that the price of carbon is becoming a very important asset for those fuels like ethanol, which are low in carbon, could maybe generate credits or opportunities for exportation of a product that is low in terms of the carbon footprint for markets in the future, right? So apart from providing support to these markets, we have technically provided support in terms of training hundreds of public workers in the region with virtual and in-person programs, some of them, with people from ACLAC or OLADE even. And what we are trying to achieve in the future is to materialize these policies and aspirations to try to decarbonize, as a number of governments in the region are trying to do. So I think that's all. And well, I'll keep on listening to the conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Carlos, for this introductory presentation. Now we have Luis, the same question. What projects are you currently developing? How do you see the work that you do in terms of transport sustainability? How do you avoid, conflicts with the food industry? I know that in Brazil and Argentina, these are big issues. So, Luis, we'd love to hear from you. Well, thank you. Can you hear me? First, we have a very short time to talk about a number of interesting topics. And after such amazing presentations, so I believe it's a key to discuss decarbonization, of course, but within a sustainable development framework where the environmental aspect is one of the components, but we have also other points, as Carlos clearly said. So, for example, biofuels will play a key role in this sense. I really hope that you managed to understand my my mix of Portuguese and Spanish, because I know that I can get a bit mixed up. But this is so important for Latin America, right? Almost every country in Latin America, except for Chile and Venezuela, have mandates to incorporate mixes, and I believe that this is a step forward in the right direction. So just to give you an overview, every 800 liters of ethanol that you burn instead of fuel, instead of petrol, you're cutting down emissions of 1 ton of CO2, and that is there, and that can be even better. So of course, you want to have electric vehicles and batteries and a crazy infrastructure that will have only 10% of impact in 10 years' time. Come on, we have this that is there, that it's available. We have a Latin American agenda that we need to promote, and that is absolutely converging with a desirable future where you have electricity and biofuels and hydrogen. So let's go step by step. In terms of just focusing on tax reductions and adjustments, considering that maybe that is not the best option for the region, you know. So you asked 3 questions, and I don't have much time, but first of all, the food industry and energy. Well, this is the opinion of the FAO. Brazil is nowadays replacing half of the consumption of petrol in more than 35 million cars using 0.5% of its surface. Brazil is a great food exporter in the same way as the US. They are producing biofuels. And who's to say that there is a conflict? Only those that don't know the right figures and the right numbers. I'm going to post on the chat some research that involved 175 scientists that produced consistent data on the availability of lands without affecting our forests and rainforests, because this efficiency process that we want to achieve, well, the key issue here to decarbonize in terms of efficiency is what I've said, right? We need to see the life cycle as a process. And when you say something like, well, yeah, because you know that the efficiency of an electric engine is 80% and the efficiency of a fuel run engine is only 20%, that's simply not true. You need to take a look at the whole process from the moment of production to the last stage. And I'm really concerned about the time constraints that I have. But I'd like to tell you that Brazil is using biofuels as a mandatory aspect since 1930. We don't have fuel without ethanol since 1930. And we're happy with that. And what you may ask me is, how did you achieve this in Brazil? Like, what about your experience? What could you tell us for it to be applied in other contexts? Well, of course, it needs to be mandated, because those that advocate the status quo, the petrol distributors, they have barriers that are just not real. They are cultural. But in Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, Paraguay, Peru, Ecuador, India, China, England, the US, they only introduced biofuels through mandates, through public policies. This doesn't work in a country like Guatemala, for example, that produces ethanol of the highest quality with no substantial environmental impact. It exports for very, very strict markets, but you know, fuel suppliers and distributors, they object. So we need to overcome these barriers that are completely against the sustainable development of our countries. Electric vehicles are coming. Yeah, definitely, they are coming. Uh, the development of charging stations and everything is something that is extremely efficient and very desirable. But where is this electricity coming from? Not necessarily from the grid. Is it? It could be produced by the very vehicle. For example, with hybrid cars. We had some great presentations today, but hybrid vehicles have not even been mentioned so far. And this is amazing to me. Why? Because Toyota is producing a vehicle that is very successful in Brazil, that can run on ethanol, a Corolla, that emits 25 grams of CO2 per kilometer. And there is not one single electric vehicle that has this efficiency. So this is an interesting point. Electrification is key, and it's coming, and it's something that we want to achieve. But you can get electrification with biofuels without investing so much in infrastructure. You need the same petrol stations as you have today. You can use them, and also you can generate electricity with fuel cells that are very, very efficient by using biofuels. Whether it's through onboard energy production, hydrogen production, or the hydrogen production at the very stations, such as, for example, Volkswagen and Toyota are working on. So come on, let us not make such strong decisions of creating charging stations and this and this and that at very, very high costs for our countries, considering that they will be so underserved. I think that this would make a lot of sense for the public policy point of view in Belgium and Finland and other countries, but we have our own agenda. Let us focus on how to electrify, yes, but let's try to be effective and make quick changes in trying to reduce emissions by using the resources that we have available, with technology that is moving towards hydrogen, that's moving towards high efficiency, and that is also creating jobs and improving life quality, and is also working to have sustainable development. Trying to decarbonize and promoting development are mandates that mean that we need to plan life cycles and these things. So just to give you an overview, 1 ton of sugarcane, 1 ton of sugarcane, when you produce electricity and first generation, and you produce ethanol, first generation, second generation biomethane, this produces 200 kilograms of hydrogen. So efficiency of the energy systems based on of something that we can clearly and easily do in our countries. This is not something that we can just overlook. So that is the first thing that I want to say. Thank you, Joni. Thank you, Luis. I believe that vision of trying to making good use of what we have available in our region is key, so that we don't just buy whatever we get from other countries and we apply it willy-nilly. Yeah, it's like a mermaid song, So we need to get our feet on earth, on the ground, and see what we have available. Yes, of course, we always move at Penuma towards complete decarbonization, but it's of course evident that we need to take advantage of what we have available, because otherwise what we have will not work out. I would like to hand the microphone over to Agustin, so that he can tell us a bit about the work that is being conducted at the ICAA in terms of transport sustainability. Okay, great. Yeah, can you hear me? Thank you, Joan. Thank you all for the invitation to be here. Congratulations to the organization on organizing these debates. And it's a pleasure to be here with Luis as well as Carlos. I know Carlos personally. Luis, I've read some of your work. And what what they said before makes it really easy for me because they touched on a number of things that I could have maybe said. So I'm going to try to be very straight to the point. But I'd like to just focus on something that Carlos and Luis said. Biofuels are present. They're present in 65 countries that have bioethanol or biodiesel mandates or both. And I believe that they are part of the future. Why? Because, first of all, they're part of an energy transition to a new paradigm of mobility that could be electric, that could be hydrogen, that could be fuel cells to hydrogen, as Luis mentioned, that are ethanol fed. And these technologies will take some time to arrive. Carlos gave a very interesting datum, which is we will have only 10% of electric mobility by 2014. We have climatic goals that we need to take on, and this is where we have biofuels. And I believe that in the future, where we have new mobility paradigms, we will have some niches where fuels will still be there. There are some very important references to, for example, the fact that electromobility will have a very strong penetration amongst small vehicles and short distance vehicles, but will have other segments where biofuels will still be present, and new segments that will, well, at the institute, for example, we can see that aviation and sea transportation will require biofuels because for those segments, the penetration of electric energy will be very, very complex to incorporate. So that will give biofuels an important role. At the institute, our vision is that additionally, apart from the motivational aspect of biofuels in terms of environmental issues, we also have two other reasons why we want to promote biofuels. One of them is the diversification of energy security, and also an agricultural economy development aspect. As Luis said, we have the potential to do this. Our countries have the raw materials to produce this, to replace fossil fuels that are being imported, and also to add value to something that we can export using biofuels and all the byproducts that maybe we could talk a bit more about later on. When you take a look at the projections, for instance, that you have at the International Energy Agency, by 2050, we would have to increase biofuel production by almost 400%, so that the transportation sector can have zero net emissions. So this is showing us the preponderant role of biofuels and the decarbonization of the sector. A question that I often get asked is why the IICA works with biofuels. And the answer is very simple under the umbrella of bioeconomy, understanding that we need to have a technical productive system that adds value. And we see in these three pillars that I described, the environmental aspect, the economic aspect, we see that biofuels are a very important development vector for the 34 member countries in the Americas. So what we do is we do four things. We raise awareness and disseminate public goods in terms of sustainable production and consumption of fuels, bioethanol, biodiesel, and some new biofuels, such as, for example, biofuels for the aviation sector. We work with capacity building, both in the private sector as well as in the public sector. We are working especially with policymakers and decision makers and some governmental agencies that work with these issues, which are very transversal. It comprises not only agriculture, but also the ministries of environment and the ministries of energy, each of them working in their own respective fields. And in the third place, we provide counseling for public policy making in terms of liquid biofuels. And fourth, but not less important, is a grid articulation. We see that we have a number of organizations that are working on this with Carlos. We have worked, for example, together in this, and we believe that it's important to articulate grids and networks because we have a common goal. So not to overextend myself, I'm just going to be at your service if you have any further questions, Joni. Thank you, Agustin. Considering that you're here with us, I'd like to ask you a very specific question that I believe Luis maybe mentioned in a way about the conflict between the food production and the biofuel production. From your point of view, also the water aspect, right? The hydrological resources in the region sometimes can be a bit complex, and we have seen in other sectors. Also related to food production, what can you tell us about the relationship? Yeah, well, it's a great question to maybe get some doubts out of the way. In terms of water supplies, I think that the answer is very simple. You need to work in two aspects: the agricultural aspect, which is, well, the same regulations that we have in every country, and for the industrial stage of things, maybe Luis and Carlos can tell us a bit more about how we have seen great progress in how we use and reuse water in the productive sector. Nowadays, the water thing is not an issue in the biofuel industry. In terms of the food versus biofuels, the debates with energy and food at the IICA, together with some universities in the States, we and some European universities, we published a paper within the framework of the World Summit of Food Systems, which has recently been organized. And it shows us how the production of biofuels and byproducts allows us, first of all, to diversify production. Secondly, to complement production, considering that you have a number of foods of very high protein values, for example, soy flour, and a number of products that could allow us to add some value to the production process and diversify it. Third, we found that biofuel production allows us to distribute and reduce production costs. This makes the whole system more efficient and safer. There is the production of a great number of raw materials that is available. We may have some crises every now and then, but it also gives us stability, usually, especially in terms of the demand of some crops that are seasonal. So when the demand is more stable, the producer can just dedicate to something that they know that they will sell, and this represents a general benefit for the whole system, and it gives us a sense of safety. This is related, of course, not only to things that make the system safer and more efficient, but also to the aspects that we mentioned before in terms of the environment and energy security and agricultural economy. So I think that's it. I see that Luis wants to say something. Yeah, thank you, Autin. It's an extremely relevant question because it is based on a type of prejudice that is that biofuel, for example, is taking food away from the hungry, and that is absolutely not true. You need to take a look at the data by the FAO. You need to take a look at African countries that are only planting 1-2% of the surface, and that is not allowing them to make any progress in terms of bioenergy because they believe that they will be wasting their lands. And you need to take a look at the data, and this is what I believe. I believe is a protective or commercial barrier that says, okay, we accept biofuels that are not produced by that through food. So, for example, the sugar cane that we know so well is one of the most efficient vegetables that you have by far. Sugarcane allows us to produce 10 milliliters of biofuel, 10,000 liters of biofuel per hectare, more than anything else. So this conflict, this debate, if there is such a thing, happening in terms of the money and the land and the water that you need. But I've seen projects in Africa where they were where they were sowing sorghum with a certain productivity level, and they began instead of planting food in the same land because it was food, and that is crazy because at the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in the States, you have the definition for biofuels as something moving towards a smaller carbon footprint. And that is the case of cane ethanol, the ethanol that is produced in Colombia and Argentina and the whole of Latin America is highly efficient in trying to mitigate emissions. Come on. You need to do these numbers before you even begin talking about electric vehicles, because that's just the mermaid song, and this goes against the interests of our region, and of course it's in favor of the interests of electricity distributors. We have our own agenda. We need to consider that. Yeah, Carlos. Yeah, I see eye to eye with what Agustin and Luis have said. And also, we need to make a call for action, right? As Luis said, these are foods that maybe are making us lose focus on the formulation of the policies. As a policymaker, you need to ask yourself, I need to make policies that take into account all the dimensions that involve sustainability. And I believe that nowadays no one would say, okay, but go and just like plant sugarcane in that tropical forest because agriculture needs to be sustainable. So all the roadmaps and all the sustainability practices need to be applied in a country that will implement for the first time a feedstock production policy to generate ethanol. So what I want to maybe highlight after what Luis and Agustin said is that experience and practice shows us that those countries that are producing in great volume biofuels have not seen their food production or food prices or lands, they have not been drastically affected. In the States, we have an increase of ethanol production of 2,000. After 2008, we have seen an increase in production. We had 8 billion gallons, and that has been tripled to even doubled to even to almost 16 billion gallons. That has been compensated by great increases in production. For example, corn production. So things can be done in a good way. In terms of the policies that you need to make, you need to ask yourself that if you're going to promote greater land areas for this production, which is not necessarily something that needs to be done, that you will not be affecting the sustainability. But the ethanol that is produced nowadays is completely sustainable, and I would like to use this contribution to answer a question that was asked on the chat, which is about the future of the industry in the midterm, because we're talking about the first generation. We're talking about first generation ethanol, and we maybe are disregarding some very exciting technological advancements that are being made in terms of the new ethanols that are really low in carbon, which are the ones that will be used in products such as, for example, the aviation fuel and technologies and advancements of the enzymes that are used to produce this new generation ethanols that are opening a whole universe of possibilities and technological applications in which we shouldn't really be too narrow-minded, because if in 1990 someone had told us, you know what, the only thing that you need to do is PC, forget about the Mac, just focus on the PC, No, well, you need to be agnostic because the world has shown us that when you keep an open mind, technologically speaking, you can find some opportunities. For instance, to try to have a diversified energy mix that is resilient to things like El Nino, La Nina that sometimes affect our region. That was very good. That was very good, Carlos. That was great. Yes, that's it. We are not against electromobility. Quite the opposite. That is coming to increase our efficiency, to decarbonize our countries and cities. But the key point is in Latin America, we have particularly interesting conditions that will allow us to produce the energy vector of solar energy, which is highly efficient to mitigate emissions, that could be implemented today. And we are doing it, and we have to do it more. We need to give value to what is ours instead of importing solutions that are possibly more expensive and maybe not so adaptable. So we have some room to perfect bioenergy in a sustainable way that is really important. The use of waste, for example, of sugar cane, that is really consolidated. We have two production plants of second generation ethanol in Brazil. One of them is by Shell, and they saw that this was interesting, and they are the biggest ethanol producers in Brazil at the moment. They produce great volumes. And finally, hydrogen, which is also walking hand in hand with this new process. So I don't think that there is any risk that the agri-industry will see their food production affected because of biofuels. Just take a look at the numbers. We are a country with 30 billion hectares of land destined to agriculture. There are some interesting studies in Guatemala, about this. There is only a fraction that you need of the land to meet the need, the food needs of our country. So there are resources, there is local technology, there is a demand for sustainable development. So I don't think I have anything else left to say. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this great meeting. And yeah, we have no enemies here. No, absolutely. I think it's important to be really open about biofuels and to clearly explain what they are, what they do, and how they are a part of the fleets of several of our countries in the region. We still have great room for improvement to make progress in trying to implement this to a greater extent, but I believe that the idea is to take advantage of every decarbonization opportunity possible, because this is what's going to take us to where we want to go. Yeah, that is urgent. That is of utmost importance, and it's so urgent that we need to support each other with all the elements that we have available. As it was said in the chat, it's not about saying that biofuels are the devil and it's going to be an either-or scenario. We need to work hand in hand with all the available solutions to try to reduce emissions. So that was the time that we had, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, okay, great. So thank you so much. We had some additional questions. But yeah, we will not have time for that now. So thank you, Carlos, Luis, Agustin, for your reflections, for being with us, hearing what we have to ask you, and well, be well. Thank you. Goodbye to you all. Thank you all. Thanks to all the members of this panel. Thanks for your comments and the contributions that make this conversation richer on our social media, on our YouTube channel, both the English channel and the Spanish channel. You can see these sessions through our media partners channels as well. So thanks to all the panelists, all the speakers, in this first round of this session. In 5 minutes, we will start the second session, the second table on sustainable cities. So please stay connected. In 5 minutes, we will move on to the next session. Thank you.
Aló. Ya estoy conectada. Ok.
Perfecto, muchas gracias a nuestra audiencia conectada. Y de inmediato iniciamos con
Thanks to all the attendees. Thank you for staying connected. The moderator of this session will be Carlos Ruiz from the UNFCCC. So please, Carlos, if you could please join us.
Muchas gracias, Gabriela. Es un verdadero placer estar con ustedes.
Thank you, Gabriela. It's a pleasure to be here. Can you hear me?
Muy bien, gracias.
Yes, loud and clear.
Bueno, muy buenos
Thanks a
días
lot.
todos.
Good morning to everyone.
Primero que nada, esta gentil invitación
First of all, I'd like to thank you for this kind invitation to be here. It's a pleasure to be with you all. Thanks to Olade and thanks to the IDB to be a moderator in this session of such an important panel on sustainable cities as part of the framework of the 6th Energy Week, which is definitely one of the most interesting and important platforms to discuss aspects related to the energy transition in our region. As Gabriela was saying, I am Carlos Ruiz Gardia, and I work at the Secretary of Climate Change at the United Nations. I work as the manager of the project at the Climatic Innovation Center, which was launched in Glasgow. This is also known as the Global Innovation Hub, and this also goes together with the support that I provide to the Regional Collaboration Center for Latin America in the Caribbean, in the city of Panama. Today we have a very distinguished panel, and we will discuss aspects related to digitalization and innovation, climatic innovation and digitalization in the energy sector, which is very relevant considering the COP results that took a couple of weeks ago in Glasgow, Scotland. And this is also very much in line with the Glasgow climate agreement and all the announcements that have been made in terms of sustainable cities in the climatic agenda, which is opening opportunities to keep on moving towards energy transition in the region. As some background information to this, it's important, I believe, to understand why cities are important in this energy transition agenda in line with the Paris Agreement, and how we have some experiences in this sense. It's important to say that more than 80% of the GDP comes of our countries comes from cities, and we are estimating that by 2050, 50% of the population of emerging markets will be living in cities. We also need to be aware of the fact infrastructure and the high environmental impact and lack of resilience to climate change is representing significant losses to our countries, as well as the fact that it's affecting the life quality of our societies. We have a number of challenges in this sense to overcome. So to give you some context, we can see that cities nowadays account for about 70% of emission generations of greenhouse gases, which is a consequence, as was said in the previous panel, of a number of the sectors that contribute to these emissions. To give you a graphic example, if we only consider the transportation sector, we are estimating that currently in the world we have approximately 1.4 billion vehicles in circulation, most of which run on fuels, and 1 billion of those are passenger vehicles, and 400 million are commercial vehicles. If we keep on having our current public policies, we may be seeing this number doubling by 2050 if we don't work following the guidelines established by the Paris Agreement and also the recent climatic plans delivered by our countries. So having said this and having told you a bit about this background, well, we can see that we have a great opportunity in our region to try to improve the planning and the future of our cities and trying to reduce environmental pollution aligned with long-term strategies that are presented by the countries as a consequence of the Paris Agreement. And that's why we thought that it would be really important to stimulate and provoke discussions on how to satisfy and meet the basic needs in the long in a way that you consider things as basic as not only physical access to consumption places or workplaces or schools, but also access to household food and healthcare in a more sustainable way. This opens up a whole spectrum in terms of climatic innovation. So this technical panel today will consider a number of very relevant aspects to cities, such as distributed generation, smart grids, smart networks, digitalization, and other new aspects related to the regulation of our frameworks, and why not the smart design or planning of our cities towards a more sustainable future. The next point is introducing this very, very distinguished panel that we have today. We have a number of experts, and I'd like to start by introducing Alexandra Arias. She is a representative of the Electricity Integration Commission for the region, and she has experience in energy issues in Latin America and the Caribbean, focusing on promoting renewable energies and energy efficiency. She is an industrial engineer in Costa Rica with a master's degree in energy and development from the Netherlands. And then we have our second, Anthony Bell. That was, sorry, Jose Antonio Ferrer in our panel. He works in Madrid, Spain. Jose Antonio Ferrer is a doctor in physical sciences, and he has a vast professional development of more than 20 years experience in innovation. As the leader of the energy efficiency unit of buildings at the CIEMAT, after years of having led the energy analysis team for urban environments. The third panelist that is joining us today, please, Juan Benavides, be welcome. He is the representative of the World Energy Council. He is an electrical engineer of the University of Los Andes, and he has a doctorate of mineral economy of the Pennsylvania University. He is an associated researcher of Desarrollo in Central and South America. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome and introduce you to Mr. Jeremy Martin. He is a representative of the Institute of the Americas, the Vice President of Energy and Sustainability of the Institute of the Americas, which is a group of experts on public policies that is here in San Diego, in the United States. So this is just a brief overview, a brief introduction of our panelists. Please bear in mind that all the details about their professional background and well, they're available on the Olada's website, so feel free to get to know more about them and what they have achieved in their careers. In the following segment that we will start now, we will have the intervention of our panelists. They will speak for about 5 minutes, and I'd like to invite you to tell us and explain to us a bit more about the projects that are being conducted in terms of clean energy in doing in your is that you have found. What are the enabling factors that you can find as you implement these projects? So with this preamble, and having told you this, I'd like to invite our first panelist, Alexandra Arias. She is the representative of the electricity integration the region for the region. So Alexandra, maybe you could tell us a bit more about the work The floor is all yours. Welcome. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the CIEL. And again, thanks to all other the RDB and all the organizing team of such an important event. First, I'd like to tell you that the CIEL has as members companies and organizations from the energy sector that are and it's mainly focused on generation, distribution, and transmission companies. But we also work with some ministries and organizations that work in the energy sector. But our focus is mainly on distribution, generation, and transmission. This helps us to really grasp what is being done. In terms of digitalization, we have a team that is called Smile Grid that has a technical coordinator. As an organization, we coordinate this at a general level, but we have a technical expert in each of these areas. And this is coordinated by Sandra Ospina from the Celsia company in Colombia. Year after year, we draft a report. We do some data collection on what is being done at a country level, at a company level, at a regional level. And in this case, we made a great effort to get means for each of the electrical companies in the region. So we have some very interesting details about the whole digitalization process that we could say has been very developed over the last 18 months due to the COVID pandemic. Those companies that had already developed their technologies had to keep on doing it, and those maybe that were falling behind had to quickly move on to this digitalization process, well, as a result of the COVID pandemic. We have surveyed all of our countries, and we have regional reports that will be presented next week as part of where we will consider all the information on the legal and regulatory frameworks that applies to each of our countries, which I believe is so important. Also, all the internal digitalizations is something that concerns us. So this work is done at a company level, related to other organizations. For example, we work with universities. We've had from universities from different countries. We have worked also with the municipalities because this information is very relevant and it needs to be shared not only with our organization members, but also with all the organizations that work in anything that's remotely related to smart cities in the countries of our region. I'd like to emphasize that the regulation process for the different issues as part of the smart cities grid is important because it allows us to make progress in each of our countries. We work with smart cities, but also we have other groups that are very close to our work. One of them, for example, is the team, where we are working with distributed generation and also storage. We have another team that works with electric vehicles. We could call it like that, like an electric vehicles team that is surveying data in the region on the issue. So they're all interconnected, and the idea is to bring everything together from each of these a very broad perspective of what is being done in each country at a regional level. Thank you, Alexandra. That was very clear. The CL is focused on collaboration, and it has a very instrumental vision in terms of co-creating digitalization tasks and thus making progress in terms of the climate agenda. So I'm very eager to know more about the scope of this smart grid and smart cities and how you're providing support to these cities in an attempt to try to mobilize energy resources and try to make this transition to this more sustainable vehicles easier, especially electric vehicles. So yeah, we will be paying a lot of attention to these developments. And before we move on to the second round, I'd like to invite our next panelist. He is José Antonio Ferrer from the CEMAT, which is the Energy and Environment Research Center, for him to tell us a bit more about their initiatives and how they can help to energy transition in line with the Paris Agreement. So, José Antonio, the floor is yours. Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank Olade and the RDP for the invitation to be here in this panel. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. At CML, we conduct research and development projects in every aspect of energy and environment. We're about 1,300 people working here. We are part of the Ministry of Energy of Spain. But in terms of smart cities, we work in two main lines that are complementary to each other. First would be demand reduction, which means that we apply the concept that the first thing should be energy efficiency. This implies using design measures both applied to buildings and urban planning, and they need to be identified for each case. When you consider things like, for example, local features, the way in which buildings are built in each of the cities, even social costs, all these peculiarities, we need to keep making our way, right? When we try to think about efficiency, and these renewables are ideally local. We analyze the full life cycle of the available options, and also we try to make it a hybrid. So we try to consider all the options at the same time. And at an urban level, we try to have a smart management that is comprehensive, that involves everyone, the producer, the consumer, in the case of distributed sources. I apologize for the microphone. With a lot of universities in the Caribbean, and we work together. The projects that we work with have a technological component that is important in terms of the development of distributed generation, distributed energy generation using renewables, as we said. And we try to work, for example, with PV, with geothermal energy. As I said, we try to find what works locally and not just the electrification of the consumption, which is, of course, a great solution, but also considering all the renewables that are available that could be applied to make our cities. We have an important technological development, but we also need to consider the places where these will be implemented. Each place has its own peculiarities, and this implies not only taking account of the technological aspects, but also the social aspects. And I'd like to, in this sense, mention one of the studies that we are currently conducting. It's a pilot study where we have people from different sectors in different countries in the Latin American and Caribbean region. We have 6 countries for each region, which are the basic pillars for development, and districts as a first step to have sustainable cities and to identify what are the existing barriers and the factors that we need to consider, and what are the different who are the different stakeholders that we need to get involved as part of this development, and what have, of course, tech that are fundamental. But although we haven't conducted this work for such a long time, we have identified some very clear barriers in the region. For example, the high cost of the technologies that are required, and also the variability maybe in the price of energy, and the need to work with the local administrations. This comes together with an urbanism that is happening really fast, that is making the implementation of these sustainable concepts a bit more difficult. But if we take actions with maybe funding agencies, and we try to comply with the electrification codes, measures, then we could develop cities, but also we could create green jobs and new business opportunities and a greater use for energy, local energy resources that will increase the independence and energy autonomy. As these measures could contribute to better as a first step to smart cities and more sustainable cities. And I hope that we will do so. Thank you so much, José Antonio, for this presentation. As you said, you're working on efficient design measures for our cities, always considering local conditions for application that are so important, because, of course, the environment change, and so this really helps in the transition to renewables when you consider the local features. Mental to do this in an inclusive way, working to get private sector, but also not only from the public sector, but also from the private sector and universities. And it's key to understand the existing barriers and how to address them, identifying the key stakeholders. To make this a path to sustainability that will benefit our future generations. So, an opportunity. Our next panelist is Juan Benavides. He's a representative of the World Energy Council. Juan, welcome. We'd like to hear more about your organization and the impact that the organization has in terms of energy transition, with a focus on digitalization and the work in our cities. Loud and clear. Thank you, Juan. Great. Thanks to Olade and the IDB for inviting me. I will tell you a bit about some things that I'm doing through multiple channels. Even though today I'm representing the WEC. I'm Chief of Development, but I also work a lot with the IDB and the World Bank, both institutionally and individually. So I'm going to be bringing all of these, phases of my work to the table. I'll tell you a bit about the articles that we've developed with Gabriel Lison from the World Bank on the role of decentralized energy resources and G technologies. These decentralized energy resources have in two terms, both the added value that you add and also the value to our users. We have the potential of these decentralized stronger with the arrival of digital communication and 5G technologies that are of low latency. And in terms of power, this will allow us to automate this self-healing process that will mean that we will have new generation smart grids that are different from the ones that we imagined 5 or 6 years ago. We will have new business models in real time that will require high speeds to read the algorithms involved, such as problem. For has used, that is smart connectivity. Digitalization is not way the role of digitalization. They underestimate the potential in how it can create value and technify our societies. So this connectivity is made up of the following components. A cloud computing component, an intensive broadband use, an AI and an IoT component, have a distributed income and add value. And so as these decentralized resources use 5G and 5G supported by good digitalization, well, for example, we are using broadband in Colombia to watch Netflix, but not to produce value. And I believe that this is not only a case of Colombia. So the opportunity to make progress depends on making a productive use of the technology and digitalization of technologies with this integrated package. As these factors converge in our cities, I have tried to promote many times city for innovation, mainly in Europe, what you call a smart energy city. It's a concept that I have tried to activate in many cities in Colombia with the World Bank and the IDB. You do small experiments, you make little progress, and you need partial collaboration, but you need, for example, the local authorities to be involved in the public sector as well for it to work. It's not because I come from academia, but I believe that this is something that is going to be the future. And so we need to really have this conversation with the authorities and business people to get this concept of smart energy city moving. Allows us to work without necessarily doing any, and this will help us to produce solutions that will be very impactful on our cities. And finally, I'd like to talk about the role of I believe that the role in the current decarbonization context is to try to flatten what we call the cost curve in terms of the fact that research and development better, and it reduces CO2, because we are in a good position, and I believe that that is the bottleneck for a number of Latin American countries, the lack of research and development. So we need this to accelerate the level of a lot of decarbonization solutions that are still not happening. That is, so thanks a lot for this first session. Thank you, Juan Benavides. He also works with the IDB, implementing capacities of energy resources that are decentralized, and the potential of this transition to digital energy and technologies, this 5G technologies that will allow automation and will accelerate transactions that are being done nowadays in a significant way, which of course will open up a whole spectrum of new applications. Together with AI, we are talking about cloud computing, broadband, and as part of a number of options that are proposed as part of a concept that is called smart energy cities, with instruments that are innovative in through digital funding and the role of research and development. Maybe as a personal note on all of this, I think that it's been a pleasure to see the evolution of the last 5 years of the role of cities that are responsible of their own planning, and how cities have become a more visible and integrated item on the climate agenda. We had a number of representatives of subnational governments at the COP summit, and they're very with the climate agenda. They have started from the first steps, and now they've moved from the what to the how. And as a part of this context, we observed in this last COP stakeholders are part of this discussion on how to design the sustainable future of our cities, in hand with the options that Juan was precisely mentioning, amongst which we have not only access to better and more resources and faster funding, but also in terms of having options to better the climate emissions. So this is a whole new spectrum that is definitely addressed. I would like to move on to our next speaker. He will be making his intervention in English. He's Jeremy Martins, and he is the Vice President of Energy and Sustainability for the Institute of the Americas. So those of you that wish to hear Jeremy in English, you can just switch to our YouTube channel in English. And those of you that want to stay in the Spanish channel, you may do so. You will have simultaneous interpretation. So, Jeremy, the floor is yours. Please, could you tell us a bit more about how contributing to the climate agenda in terms of cities, with an emphasis on digitalization tasks? Jeremy, you have the floor. Please go ahead. Muchas gracias desde San Diego.
Yo cambio al inglés para ser más preciso, para respetar los tiempos. Si sigo en español, Tal vez no me entienden los puntos ni puedo respetar los 5 minutos que me han. Thank you very much. And I know everyone has the opportunity to switch to the English translation, or excuse me, the Spanish translation of my English comments. Just very briefly, the Institute of the Americas is an institution that actually just last week started celebrating our 40th anniversary. We've been an institution based at the University of California, San Diego, a policy center here. Just really quickly, I have two broad areas that I want to bring to the table. I know one of them probably would have been a better fit in the previous session, but let me try and link back to the previous session because I see two areas to add to this conversation around and I know the IDB is also involved here today. So the role of development banks is critical. I think Marcelino Madrigal was on the previous session, and I know Ariel Yepes, who's an old friend and recently was promoted. So hopefully, best wishes to all of them, Virginia Schneider, and a whole host of other folks there. But so let me take two broad terms here, or two broad areas where a specific example, because we can see just exactly what's happening with the metro in Santiago in sort of their pursuit of net zero clean energy the consumption. So just roughly for folks to understand of transit in the daily life in Santiago, over 2.5 million riders a day. There's over 100 stations, 65 miles of track. It is a fundamental the nation. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention just how important that was reflected 2 years ago in the broader issues of Chile, when a slight fare increase proved to be a flashpoint and unleashed pretty brutal protests in a lot of contratemps in Chile. So again, I think what that emphasizes is just exactly how critical and how important Metro in Santiago is, and therefore this goal, if we step back from the unrest around the fare increase and we instead look at the mobility objective of the Metro, they have essentially moved to a clean energy supply for their entire network. As I mentioned, 2.5 million passengers a day, a huge number of stations. And it's important because I think one of the key lessons that I'd like to share from this pursuit of contracts of renewable energy, obviously in Chile, the country with its legal and regulatory framework has pursued important renewable portfolio mandates, but also with that has come an enormous economic upside. And sort of coming back to where I think I want to focus this example is, yes, the Metro in Santiago was doing a lot of this for pursuit of clean energy and net zero targets and objectives. But you make sure you understand that it was also an economic sustainability question, right? In point of fact, they were able to bring costs, down, reduce costs through some long-term power purchase agreements with renewable projects in Chile. And so the point being that it's not only sustainable in the term of reducing footprint and emissions and making daily life more sustainable, but it's sustainable for the government and for the metro and for citizens, hopefully long-term, in terms of economics, in terms of better return on investment for energy that the massive system is consuming. So I think the final point is there is still more to be done. And so, in as much as that's a great example, we can also look to what some others have talked about, which is how to bring distributed generation solutions to the metro in this case, or other systems of mass transit as we look around the region. All those miles of track that are outside, all the stations, these provide wonderful opportunities for distributed energy solutions, rooftop solar, et cetera. And so I think this could be an opportunity to consolidate and like I said, become an even more important reference point for the sustainability of mass transit in Latin America, in the region, in the hemisphere. So that's one specific example. Let me move now to what I really wanted to talk about, which is the consumer choice. This idea of the prosumer, right? Where we've all seen this major change in the way energy is consumed, or the way citizens express themselves, a more bottom-up, that sort of idea of the prosumer. And here in California, that's now expressed itself not only in policy, but in actual innovations around how we contract, consume, and manage our energy. And there's something that's been developed here called community choice aggregation, which goes by the acronym or the sigla CCA. And so what happens with community choice aggregations, or as they're referred to, CCAs, it becomes an opportunity for consumers to an alternative to the traditional energy supply system. And as I mentioned, they're becoming very, very common here in California, where I live in Solana Beach, California, just north of San Diego, is part of a community choice aggregation. About 2 years ago, we went through the process as citizens of being able to opt in to the community choice program and to be able to determine our participation in that. And so I think what's important here is, again, this prosumer in bringing down to the consumer level, down to the citizen level, the ability to control how you buy power, what sources you prefer, and moves away from sort of this traditional utility model, right? I mean, I think that's the key innovative part of this, and the key technological change is the aggregation part brings citizens, it brings communities together so that they can then purchase that power from generators, and in doing so, be more selective. And in the case of the community choice aggregation system that I'm part of, you can express just what percentages of clean, green, renewable energy you want to have as part of your portfolio. Obviously, there are price differentials you have for that. But I think what it does also is gives you the chance to lower your cost. It brings a lower cost for consumers and greater control. And this is the whole concept, right? So greater control of the energy mix. So you can really, if you want, pay a premium, just like we would do for an organic fruit or vegetable at the market or organic coffee. Pay that premium for the largest percentage of renewables in your mix. So you can really personally choose how green your generation or your energy mix is. And that's obviously something that didn't happen with your local utility, even though California has had very strong mandates for renewable portfolios, and the local utility here has been pursuing and meeting and actually going beyond those renewable portfolio standards. Those are still in the 30, 40, maybe 50% category, whereas with this consumer choice, you can push up into 70, 80, and in some cases even more. Just to sort of wrap up a little bit of the particulars, it is so far very particular to only 8 states in the United States of America: Massachusetts, Ohio, California, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, and Virginia. There's obviously a legislative aspect. There has to be the legislative, legal, regulatory framework for communities to be able to pursue this innovative approach to consuming and choice with energy. it pertains at this point only to states that have deregulated their energy markets. And so liberalized energy markets in the United States are those states that now are enacting community choice aggregation legislation. Obviously, that's an important element for many countries and many markets in Latin America, where you have a mixture of deregulated and liberalized and some more state-controlled or state-managed energy markets, where this system at this point in time may not be terribly relevant or possible. But I think the final point is, one of the criticisms as this was being developed the last few years was that you would ultimately, a consumer would have to pay a lot more or experience higher rates. But the fact is, the evidence now is beginning to show, and we're still at the very infancy, this is very nascent, but the preliminary data points are showing that the CCA cost structure is typically lower than the utilities have been. And also the profits, right? So in many cases, the profits are returned to the community through programs such as rebates for energy efficiency, fiscal incentives for rooftop solar, those distributed energy solutions that are so key to everything we're talking about today, but also electric vehicle purchases, particularly in lower income areas, and a host of other environmentally friendly activities, tree planting, greening, et cetera. So that's in a nutshell, what I wanted to share. I mean, I really want to emphasize this is something unique, it's innovative. Community choice aggregation has been obviously heavily debated here in California. There's a lot of literature that I think is beginning to emerge to show that it is a viable opportunity for consumers to have more choice and not to have a higher bill, which is always the big concern, right? So I want to put that as a reference for all of us in the region, and hopefully we can consider this going forward in our broader conversation. And finally, if you don't mind, some more about the work of the Institute. We have been working for several months on an analysis of clean energy cost savings, speaking of cost savings, at Mexico's Comisión Federal de Electricidad, CFE. We'll have a major launch event tomorrow. So invite everyone here today to join us for that discussion tomorrow, very specific to Mexico and clean energy deployment, and particularly with regards to the national utility CFE. So I hope I didn't abuse my time. Thank you again for letting me speak in English, Carlos. Thank you, Olade, Alfonso Blanco. It's always a pleasure to be part of this, and congratulations on a wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy Martins. That was Jeremy Martins from the Institute of the Americas and the Innovation Cities, Innovation and the concept of consumer choices. Me mantengo en español. Hemos compartido el canal con la traducción.
I will now go back to Spanish. We did have simultaneous interpretation for Jeremy, but now let's briefly summarize the interesting information that Jeremy was sharing with us. It has mostly to do with the role of mass transit and how critical mass transit is for societies. Obviously, the example shared about the electrification of Chile's public transport with the metro was very interesting for us. And of course, all of this responds to the reactions of consumers. And this has a lot of potential to be more accessible in terms of costs as technology and innovation continues advancing. And he also spoke about the moving forward with energy solutions towards an energy transition based on renewable sources. So those were very interesting points. Also, it was very interesting to hear about the notion of the prosumer that has to do with the aggregate consumer's choice. And this obviously gives us a broader perspective on the cultural decisions that we are making as a society, which also have an influence on the implementation of the climate agenda. Other interesting aspects that have to do with regulations is that even though the perception might be that this has a very high cost, we do know that the benefits of these transitions do give us return on investment, and more opportunities for employment and for equitable choices. Now, to wrap up this round, I know that we are running out of time, but we do need to bear in mind the importance of having an improved access by designing more compact, more complete cities with optimized distances, to have access, for example, to bike transportation, and to do away with domestic vehicles, and to have better access to public services that can allow us as members of the cities and as cities as such to significantly reduce our emissions. So as a reflection, I see that the common denominator of all of your comments is that in the introduction of a digitalization of cities, we do see that one of the facilitating aspects is not necessarily technology per se. It's not necessarily the funding, but it's mostly about integrating all facilitating aspects that go beyond technology and funding, but also include cooperation, business model or business schemes, and to find a way to integrate them in order to amplify the space for innovation in digitalization, not just by contributing in the long term to what we understand as possible, but also looking towards what we need. And by doing that, filling up that room for innovation through research, through development, as mentioned by some of the panelists. I have 5 minutes for a quick fire questions session. So I do want to invite you to give me very brief responses about the role of the private sector in the implementation of these digitalization tools and systems. How does the private sector function as an amplifier or facilitator of funding? What would you recommend to bring in the private sector beyond the regulations and the driving force of the public sector? How can we amplify the role of consumers, the role of the civil society, and of the private sector as a whole? So for that, I want to invite the panelists to share their answers. Go ahead in whichever order you want. If you'd like, I can start. Yes, Alexandra, go ahead. I think something that Mr. Martin mentioned that is very important is that in these smart cities, we have people living, we have smart citizens. We're not just consumers, we are prosumers, and we cannot lose sight of this. Another thing that we need to consider is that the participation of all the stakeholders is vital. All the stakeholders who are part of a smart city are also smart citizens, and they require services, and they analyze information, they analyze possibilities, they analyze everything that they find available for them. And this, of course, makes the situation clearer for the work of all the different stakeholders. And for that, of course, the private sector plays a major role in the creation of smart cities. What we need to do to attract the private sector and the civil society is to offer them room for participation, real opportunities for participation, where they can amply participate based on their abilities. In some cases, it's by creating business models that might allow bus companies to provide communal electrical transport. I mean, we could provide many examples, but what I think we need to show these private stakeholders are aspects that might be interesting for them, that might help their business grow, and perhaps the civil society might be interested in having more possibilities of moving without having to use their own personal vehicles. Perhaps for the private sector, we might motivate them by showing them a business model that might be interesting for them. But I think that at the end of the day, we need to just get together with all of the stakeholders, analyze what they might be interested in, see what they might bring to the table, and ask them to work together to get that smart city that we want. But that's a big summary. Thank you, Alexandra. Those options I think are feasible, and I think it's quite intriguing to hear about this concept that technology itself is not enough, and that despite the technological progress that we see on many fronts, we still need more innovative business model, like that example that you provided of bus drivers using these tools for business models that might become more sustainable. If any other panelist would like to add something before we finish? Yes, I want to say something very simple. If governments invest in R&D as a patient capital, they will get results. First, that will lead to the profitability of things that are very close to being commercialized. And then they will also create prospects where perhaps the private profitability is negative, but the social profit is positive. Based on this, the government can create a series of business models where they might have funds providing subsidized credits to reduce the risk that private companies run when they are investing. So my answer is, in a first stage, I think the private sector will need to strongly rely on the public sector, and the public sector will have to improve the credits and provide risk assurance. Perfect. Thank you, Juan. The stimulus provided by governments and policymakers in this implementation stage for these kind of solutions are fundamentals to draw in the private sector and create strategic alliances, moving beyond the economic benefits, of course, and understanding the cost of opportunity of inaction, and understanding the social benefits that these measures are offering us. So the plan for the public budget is fundamental, of course. And I wanted to summarize the different angles and perspectives that we heard today. We heard from organizations such as the CL that show a broader perspective on the co-creation of smart city grids. They also work with energy resources that are distributed and that support the energy transition. And it's very interesting to hear from their experience. We heard from the Environmental, Energetic, and Technological Research Center, and we have heard about their work on efficient design measures, but we've also heard about their perspective on the creation of jobs and opportunities. We heard from the World Energy Council sharing about the potential of looking into digitalization, because without this, we will not be able to achieve the implementation rates from our commitments in an efficient way based on the urgency that we are facing. But we are looking into new innovation horizons to look at the new demand for that we expect by 2050 in a more sustainable, more friendly way, by including digitalization and access to solutions using AI. And finally, we also heard from the work of the Americas Institute, mainly with the preferences of consumers within cities. Preferences that are not just important to understand the obstacles and the roadblocks in the implementation of a climate agenda within cities, but that are also options for solutions. So it is important to hear this in order to hear more about what consumers are asking of us. I think the most important message that was repeated in the presentations and the interventions of these panelists is that there is a need to collaborate, the need to look at this new agenda as a development model, opening opportunities not just for entrepreneurs and business persons, but also to deal with other aspects of the 2030 agenda, such as equality, and the need to understand these digital solutions and city solutions in a holistic way, moving beyond technology and looking at policies, business models, cooperation, into other facilitating aspects. So without further ado, I want to thank the panelists for their incredible presentations and mention the importance of establishing this Latin American network to move forward with the digitalization and energy transfer in light of the Paris Agreement objectives. Thank you. Let us go back to Gabriela and to our colleagues in OLADE. Thank you for giving us a space for this panel. Thank you, Carlos, for being a moderator. Thank you to the panelists who participated in this important roundtable. Thank you to the attendees who have stayed with us this morning through the Zoom platform, as well as through our YouTube channels. And we want to invite you to join us today at 2 p.m. Quito time. For the second part of this panel, we have roundtable number 3 called Green Hydrogen and roundtable 4 on disruptive technologies. Once again, we want to thank you for having joined us this morning, and we welcome you to join us in the afternoon. Thank you.